There has been much discussion over the years in regard to Postal and the fleeting elements that make up its in-game world. The violence and nightmarish visuals often take center stage, setting a macabre tone long before the incredibly dark ending, which has only become more distressing since 1997. The ambiguity of the bloodshed wasn't always set in stone, however. During development, it was decided that the story would be kept to a minimum for the sake of gameplay, with the motivations of the protagonist kept vague. There are scraps of information that remain, however, and further insight can be gleaned from the game's manual, as well as old press release archives and leftovers from the beta. These loose and frayed threads of a story that never came to be can be woven into several different theories. But first, we need to explore what the demon in question is, hidden deep within the game's files.
Only my weapon understands me.
The sardonic voice lines of the main character, often joyfully malicious barbs hurled at his victims, are portrayed by Rick Hunter.
Going postal.
But these voice lines are only present under a particular circumstance. Looking to the level editor, we'll find that every map without question contains an object, simply labeled Demon. This object is what's responsible for playing the voice lines heard during gameplay.
Bleed.
If this object is removed, the demon and its commentary are no longer present. When the player takes damage, however, the pain sound effects are not voiced by Hunter, but these anguish cries will still play. There's a distinction here that the voice lines we hear reacting with such savage glee to the violence is not necessarily that of the main character, which begs the question of who or what is it. While taking the label literally feels somewhat reductive, there are certain thematic elements that align with the premise. Many of the voice lines from this demon are spoken as if they are addressing the protagonist. Some are words of encouragement, but others come across as gaslighting, as if they are attempting mental isolation or building some sort of savior complex in the character.
Only you can stop the evil.
Some are spoken from the first-person perspective, including one of the series' most iconic lines, but it's undercut by the action that it accompanies.
I regret nothing.
The text that appears during the level loading screens is often written with elation to the violence and death, from a perspective that seems external to humanity.
I will don the eviscerated organs of my enemies as party hats, wear their shredded entrails as neckties, and oh, how I shall dance!
A conceited view of mankind, dripping with malice and contempt.
I am the Celestial Gardener, policing the planet of the stink raids and poisons which leak out even through the cracks in the cold asphalt sidewalks of the City of Sin!
Several levels contain more ethereal language. The train station, for instance, reads Armageddon, the river Styx, Hades, and all points in between, referencing the underworld of Greek mythology, painting a picture of humanity's destruction as we descend into hell. There's also mention of gods in a plural sense in the Air Force Base, but there is a much stronger presence of biblical references, like the mention of the halls of the Vatican in the same level. Even the name of the town Paradise is a sardonic parody. What should describe an idyllic place is quickly becoming a mass grave. Consider the audio in the game's final stage. The whispering is spoken in Latin, reciting the Gregorian chant, Media vita in morte sumas. In the midst of life, we are in death. This was sometimes sung during the Middle Ages to invoke the protection of God. It appears here in its entirety, with the exception of the final line, Amare morte ne trados nos. Deliver us not to bitter death. This omission could be seen as a plea from the protagonist for his life to end during a moment of clarity, the controlling force having abandoned its vessel, leaving him to confront a bitterly cold reality. These loose threads lend some validity to the idea of the demon being a real and physical force, but they fall more into a thematic styling. There are other angles to consider, which are not only more interesting, but far more bleak. We could instead view the demon as not a physical being, but the motivating force that is driving a violent reaction. Putting the in-game text aside and looking to the game's manual, we'll find a parallel list of diary entries that follow the same path of destruction. These pages are written from the perspective of the protagonist, with a far more personal tone, and if they are to be believed, chronicle a man on the defensive as his home and environment quickly descend into chaos.
Moving to Paradise was a tragic mistake. People here are sick. I hear gunshots, screams after dark. Now the phone calls saying I'm being thrown out of this house, my house, wearing Kevlar vests and carrying a sidearm at all times now.
The diary's author immediately flees in search of the sheriff for help, only to find that he too has fallen into some kind of violent rage. The aforementioned sickness is present from location to location, only growing as we march through blood and bone. Infection, contamination, germ warfare. Some sort of miasma permeates throughout the entire town. This must be the reason everyone has gone kill crazy, and it needs to be stopped. The label of diary is soon replaced by war journal. The commitment to the task at hand is unwavering, with an increase in callousness to the situation. Sights are quickly set on reaching the local military base.
Air Force must napalm entire town. Ensure this madness doesn't contaminate rest of the country.
Which is treated as a distant but constant landmark of salvation. There is a brief consideration that the base may be the very source of corruption, with uncertainty, even as it draws near.
Whatever waits at the base, I'm going to see it with my own eyes.
There are far more allusions to the idea that a governmental conspiracy exists, but to find them, we'll need to look to an archive of the original website, as well as a piece of postal media that unfortunately never came to exist. During Postal's development, story elements fell to the wayside, allowing the gameplay to take center stage. Despite this narrative absence, there was a book planned to be released at the same time. The Complete Guide to Going Postal. Not slated as a simple strategy guide, but a stylistic companion piece, it would have served to illuminate and enrich the game's events through a collection of in-universe media. Scroll journal entries would be juxtaposed with a series of newspaper and radio reports, giving the complete details of what had occurred at each location. A similar concept could be seen in the game's marketing, with posters that depicted a live broadcast with a quote, and then another providing more details along with their cause of death. On the webpage that outlines the book and its contents, it teases the idea of the military's possible involvement, lending some more credence to the suspicion of the Air Force base. There's also mention of militia and Waco-related pamphlets that were found by the police at the killer's home, but it's followed up with the question, is he a madman or a man on a mission? Throwing every element into a shadow of doubt. Though these could be excluded from the canon, as the book was never created, I feel they are still worthy of some consideration due to how in line they are with the game itself. Even if it had released, the exact motive and events may have remained unclear. Even the game's box begs the question, conspiracy or insanity? While these theories are being discussed in isolation for the sake of clarity, they are not mutually exclusive from one another and may carry significant overlap. All the pieces laid out in the previous theory dovetail into the possibility of mental breakdown or psychosis that is blurring the lines between reality and nightmare. While shooting a path across Paradise, the diary's author ponders if they are immune to the effects of the sickness that's plaguing the city. There is a constant stream of self-reassurance that he is sane, that he must save everyone else, all of which build upon the idea of delusions of grandiosity. For a brief moment, they even consider if they too could be infected, but quickly perish the thought with an expression of too far to quit now. How they arrived at this state of mind is unclear, but what we can see is what they're experiencing. The level loading screens are one of the primary contributors to Postal's horrifying atmosphere, painting it in a particularly grim shade. There is a great insight about them detailed in the game's official strategy guide, with a section in the back that interviews many of the game's developers. One in particular comes from the artist that created these pieces, Randy Briley, in which he explains the impetus and direction of these scenes.
The concept was to be gruesomely real, and I wanted the art to reflect that. The cutscenes were a combination of abstraction and realism to help set the mood of the game. In those images, I tried to create a visual representation of what might be occurring in the main character's head, if what was happening in the game was happening in real life. I tried to reflect on images that could have stimulated the main character to go postal, as well as show what the outside world might look like in his running dementia. Hopefully, the screens convey those feelings.
Ambiguity is dyed in the wool of Postal, with statements that undermine their own certainty. On the website archive once again, it notes that the game features a mature theme about a character who goes postal when he uncovers a sick and twisted conspiracy that drives him to defend humanity from pure evil. Or is it something else? It also lists off the various enemies and victims you'll fight in the game, the final being bystanders that just won't get out of your way, hint hint. Even the game box declares that they're out to get you, which is immediately undercut by, or are they? Another glaring instance of this can be found in the April 10th press release from 1997, when the postal dude was still nameless and the town of Paradise was referred to by its real-life inspiration of Bisbee, Arizona. It details the upcoming book and includes an unused diary entry.
Today is the day it happened. Today is the day that all the madness built to a deafening crescendo of voices, demons, angels, and the voice of the Old One, telling me what I must do.
This throws even more elements into the mix, further adding to the chaos. In particular, the mention of the Old One depicts the character's mind as being plagued with dark whispers. At one point, this ominous being was mentioned repeatedly, appearing in the beta and the game's demo.
In the hands of the Old One, I am a weapon of destruction, spitting death in all directions to slay the enemies of mankind.
The player character is beholden to this being and reveres them with divine authority, and with their blessing, rises to the challenge of saving humanity.
The demons are real, and they are here. Fate has delivered me into their midst and given me the opportunity to save my species from 1,000,000 years of dominion.
I feel it isn't a mistake that the player character has no true name. The moniker of the Postal Dude represents a certain commonality, a grave warning that any regular person, befallen by mental or material circumstances dire enough, could perform an egregious act. Every evil we've ever known was committed by humans, after all. The only time we see the protagonist acting outside our control is in the final level, in a cutscene, moments before breaking down, and then we bear witness to their subsequent imprisonment within an asylum. We were the force that held dominion over their action. We pulled the trigger. Without us, maybe Paradise would have remained as such.